He shook hands and turned around to the back seat again. The other Bess had been impressed. He sat back comfortably and smiled at me when I turned around to look at the country. But the effort of talking American seemed to have tired him. He did not say anything after that. The bus climbed steadily up the road. The country was barren and rocks stuck up through the clay. There was no grass beside the road. Looking back, we could see the country spread out below. Far back, the fields were squares of green and brown on the hillsides. Making the horizon were the brown mountains. They were strangely shaped. As we climbed higher, the horizon kept changing. As the bus ground slowly up the road, we could see other mountains coming up in the south. Then the road came up over the crest, flattened out, and went into a forest. It was a forest of cork oaks, and the sun came through the trees in patches, and there were cattle grazing back in the trees. We went through the forest, and the road came out and turned along a rise of land, and out ahead of us was a rolling green plain, with dark mountains beyond it. These were not like the brown heat-baked mountains we had left behind. These were wooded, and there were clouds coming down from them. The green plain stretched off. It was cut by fences, and the white of the road showed through the trunks of a double line of trees that crossed the plain toward the north. As we came to the edge of the rise, we saw the red roofs and the white houses of Brigitte ahead, strung out on the plain, and away off on the shoulder of the first dark mountain was the gray metal-sheathed roof of the monastery of Roncesvalles. "There's Roncesvalles," I said. "Where?" "Way off there where the mountain starts." "It's cold up here," Bill said. "It's high," I said. "Must be 1,200 meters." "It's awfully cold," Bill said. The bus leveled down onto the straight line of road that ran to Brigitte. We passed a crossroads and crossed a bridge over a stream. The houses of Brigitte were along both sides of the road. There were no side streets. We passed the church and the schoolyard, and the bus stopped. We got down, and the driver handed down our bags in the rod case. A carabinier in his cocked hat and yellow leather cross-straps came up. "What's in there?" He pointed to the rod case. I opened it and showed him. He asked to see our fishing permits, and I got them out. He looked at the date and then waved us on. "Is that all right?" I asked. "Yes, of course." We went up the street, past the whitewashed stone houses, families sitting in the doorways watching us, to the inn. The fat woman who ran the inn came out from the kitchen and shook hands with us. She took off her spectacles, wiped them, and put them on again. It was cold in the inn, and the wind started to blow outside. The woman sent a girl upstairs with us to show the room. There were 2 beds, a washstand, a clothes chest, and a big framed steel engraving of Nuestra Senora de Roncesvalles. The wind was blowing against the shutters. The room was on the north side of the inn. We washed, put on sweaters, and came downstairs into the dining room. It had a stone floor, low ceiling, and was oak-paneled. The shutters were up, and it was so cold you could see your breath. "My God," said Bill, "it can't be this cold tomorrow. I'm not going to wade a stream in this weather." There was an upright piano in the far corner of the room, beyond the wooden tables, and Bill went over and started to play. "I got to keep warm," he said. I went out to find the woman and ask her how much the room and board was. She put her hands under her apron and looked away from me. 12 pesetas. "Why, we only paid that in Pamplona." She did not say anything, just took off her glasses and wiped them on her apron. "That's too much," I said. "We didn't pay more than that at a big hotel. We've put in a bathroom." "Haven't you got anything cheaper?" "Not in the summer. Now is the big season." We were the only people in the inn. Well, I thought, it's only a few days. "Is the wine included?" "Oh, yes." "Well," I said, "it's all right." I went back to Bill. He blew his breath at me to show how cold it was, and went on playing. I sat at one of the tables and looked at the pictures on the wall. There was one panel of rabbits, dead, one of pheasants, also dead, and one panel of dead ducks. The panels were all dark and smoky looking. There was a cupboard full of liqueur bottles. I looked at them all. Bill was still playing. "How about a hot rum punch?" he said. "This isn't going to keep me warm permanently." I went out and told the woman what a rum punch was and how to make it. In a few minutes a girl brought a stone pitcher, steaming, into the room. Bill came over from the piano, and we drank the hot punch and listened to the wind. There isn't too much rum in that. I went over to the cupboard and brought the rum bottle and poured a half-tumblerful into the pitcher. "Direct action," said Bill. "It beats legislation." The girl came in and laid the table for supper. "It blows like hell up here," Bill said. The girl brought in a big bowl of hot vegetable soup and the wine. We had fried trout afterward, and some sort of a stew and a big bowl full of wild strawberries. We did not lose money on the wine, and the girl was shy but nice about bringing it. The old woman looked in once and counted the empty bottles. After supper we went upstairs and smoked and read in bed to keep warm. Once in the night I woke and heard the wind blowing. Felt good to be warm and in bed. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. When I woke in the morning, I went to the window and looked out. It had cleared, and there were no clouds on the mountains. Outside, under the window, were some carts and an old diligence. The wood of the roof cracked and split by the weather. It must have been left from the days before the motor buses. A goat hopped up on one of the carts, and then to the roof of the diligence. He jerked his head at the other goats below, and when I waved at him, he bounded down. Bill was still sleeping, so I dressed, put on my shoes outside in the hall, and went downstairs. No one was stirring downstairs, so I unbolted the door and went out. It was cool outside in the early morning, and the sun had not yet dried the dew that had come when the wind died down. I hunted around in the shed behind the inn, found a sort of mattock, went down toward the stream to try and dig some worms for bait. The stream was clear and shallow, but it did not look trouty. On the grassy bank, where it was damp, I drove the mattock into the earth and loosened a chunk of sod. There were worms underneath. They slid out of sight as I lifted the sod, and I dug carefully and got a good many. Digging at the edge of the damp ground, I filled 2 empty tobacco tins with worms and sifted dirt onto them. The goats watched me dig. When I went back into the inn, the woman was down in the kitchen, and I asked her to get coffee for us and that we wanted a lunch. Bill was awake and sitting on the edge of the bed. "I saw you out of the window," he said. "Didn't want to interrupt you. What were you doing? Bearing your money. You lazy bum. Been working for the common good? Splendid. I want you to do that every morning." "Come on," I said. "Get up." "What? Get up? I never get up." He climbed into bed and pulled the sheet up to his chin. Try and argue me into getting up. I went on looking for the tackle and putting it all together in the tackle bag. "Aren't you interested?" Bill asked. "I'm going down and eat." "Eat? Why didn't you say eat? I thought you just wanted me to get up for fun." "Eat? Fine. Now you're reasonable. You go out and dig some more worms, and I'll be right down." "Oh, go to hell. Work for the good of all." Bill stepped into his underclothes. "Show irony and pity." I started out of the room with the tackle bag, the nets, and the rod case. "Hey, come back." I put my head in the door. "Aren't you going to show a little irony and pity?" I thumbed my nose. "That's not irony." As I went downstairs, I heard Bill singing, "Irony and pity, when you're feeling. Oh, give them irony and give them pity. Oh, give them irony when they're feeling. Just a little irony, just a little pity." He kept on singing until he came downstairs. The tune was, "The bells are ringing for me and my gal." I was reading a week-old Spanish paper. What's all this irony and pity? What? Don't you know about irony and pity? No? Who got it up? Everybody. They're mad about it in New York. It's just like the Fratellinis used to be. The girl came in with the coffee and buttered toast, or rather it was bread toasted and buttered. Ask her if she's got any jam, Bill said. Be ironical with her. Have you got any jam? That's not ironical. I wish I could talk Spanish. The coffee was good, and we drank it out of big bowls. The girl brought in a glass dish of raspberry jam. Thank you. Hey, that's not the way, Bill said. Say something ironical. Make some crack about Primo de Rivera. I could ask her what kind of jam they think they've gotten into in the riff. Poor, said Bill, very poor. You can't do it. That's all. You don't understand irony. You have no pity. Say something pitiful. Robert Cohn. Not so bad. That's better. Now why is Cohn pitiful? Be ironic. He took a big gulp of coffee. Ah, hell, I said, it's too early in the morning. There you go. And you claim you want to be a writer, too. You're only a newspaper man. An expatriated newspaper man. You ought to be ironical the minute you get out of bed. You ought to wake up with your mouth full of pity. Go on, I said. Who did you get this stuff from? Everybody. Don't you read? Don't you ever see anybody? You know what you are. You're an expatriate. Why don't you live in New York? Then you'd know these things. What do you want me to do? Come over here and tell you every year? Take some more coffee, I said. Good. Coffee is good for you. It's the caffeine in it. Caffeine? We are here. Caffeine puts a man on her horse and a woman in his grave. You know what's the trouble with you? You're an expatriate. One of the worst type. Haven't you heard that? Nobody that ever left their own country ever wrote anything worth printing, not even in the newspapers. He drank the coffee. You're an expatriate. You've lost touch with the soil. You get precious. Fake European standards have ruined you. You drink yourself to death. You've become obsessed by sex. You spend all your time talking, not working. You're an expatriate, see? You hang around cafes. It sounds like a swell life, I said. When do I work? You don't work. One group claims women support you. Another group claims you're impotent. No, I said, I just had an accident. Never mention that, Bill said. That's the sort of thing that can't be spoken of. That's what you ought to work up into a mystery, like Henry's bicycle. He had been going splendidly, but he stopped. I was afraid he thought he had hurt me with that crack about being impotent. I wanted to start him again. It wasn't a bicycle, I said. He was riding horseback. I heard it was a tricycle. Well, I said, a plane is sort of like a tricycle. The joystick works the same way. But you don't pedal it. No, I said, I guess you don't pedal it. Let's lay off that, Bill said. All right, I was just standing up for the tricycle. I think he's a good rider, too, Bill said, and you're a hell of a good guy. Anybody ever tell you you were a good guy? I'm not a good guy. Listen, you're a hell of a good guy, and I'm fonder of you than anybody on earth. I couldn't tell you that in New York. It mean I was a faggot. That was what the Civil War was about. Abraham Lincoln was a faggot. He was in love with General Grant. So was Jefferson Davis. Lincoln just freed the slaves on a bet. The Dred Scott case was framed by the Anti-Saloon League. Sex explains it all. The Colonel's lady and Judy O'Grady are lesbians under their skin. He stopped. Want to hear some more? Shoot, I said. I don't know any more. Tell you some more at lunch. Old Bill, I said. You bum. We packed the lunch and 2 bottles of wine in the rucksack, and Bill put it on. I carried the rod case and the landing net slung over my back. We started up the road and then went across a meadow, and found a path that crossed the fields and went toward the woods on the slope of the first hill. We walked across the fields on the sandy path. The fields were rolling and grassy, and the grass was short from the sheep grazing. The cattle were up in the hills. We heard their bells in the woods. The path crossed a stream on a foot log. The log was surfaced off, and there was a sapling bent across for a rail. In the flat pool beside the stream, tadpoles spotted the sand. We went up a steep bank and across the rolling fields. Looking back, we saw Brigitte, white houses and red roofs, and the white road with a truck going along it. and the dust rising. Beyond the fields we crossed another faster-flowing stream. A sandy road led down to the ford, and beyond into the woods. The path crossed the stream on another foot log below the ford, and joined the road, and we went into the woods. It was a beech wood, and the trees were very old. Their roots bulked above the ground, and the branches were twisted. We walked on the road between the thick trunks of the old beeches, and the sunlight came through the leaves in light patches on the grass. The trees were big, and the foliage was thick, but it was not gloomy. There was no undergrowth, only the smooth grass, very green and fresh, and the big gray trees well spaced as though it were a park. "This is country," Bill said. The road went up a hill, and we got into a thick woods, and the road kept on climbing. Sometimes it dipped down, but rose again steeply. All the time we heard the cattle in the woods. Finally, the road came out on the top of the hills. We were on the top of the height of the land that was the highest part of the range of wooded hills we had seen from Bergete. There were wild strawberries growing on the sunny side of the ridge in a little clearing in the trees. Ahead, the road came out of the forest and went along the shoulder of the ridge of hills. The hills ahead were not wooded, and there were great fields of yellow gorse. Way off we saw the steep bluffs, dark with trees and jutting with gray stone, that marked the course of the Irati River. We have to follow this road along the ridge, cross these hills, go through the woods on the far hills, and come down to the Irati Valley, I pointed out to Bill. "That's a hell of a hike. It's too far to go and fish and come back the same day, comfortably." "Comfortably? That's a nice word. We'll have to go like hell to get there and back and have any fishing at all." It was a long walk, and the country was very fine, but we were tired when we came down the steep road that led out of the wooded hills into the valley of the Rio de la Fabrica. The road came out from the shadow of the woods into the hot sun. Ahead was a river valley. Beyond the river was a steep hill. There was a field of buckwheat on the hill. We saw a white house under some trees on the hillside. It was very hot, and we stopped under some trees beside a dam that crossed the river. Bill put the pack against one of the trees, and we jointed up the rods, put on the reels, tied on leaders, and got ready to fish. "You're sure this thing has trout in it?" Bill asked. "It's full of them. I'm going to fish a fly." "You got any McGinty's?" "There's some in there." "You going to fish bait?" "Yeah, I'm going to fish the dam here." "Well, I'll take the fly book then." He tied on a fly. "Where'd I better go? Up or down?" "Down is the best. There are plenty up above, too." Bill went down the bank. "Take a worm can." "No, I don't want one. If they won't take a fly, I'll just flick it around." Bill was down below watching the stream. "Say," he called up against the noise of the dam, "how about putting the wine in that spring up the road?" "All right," I shouted. Bill waved his hand and started down the stream. I found the 2 wine bottles in the pack and carried them up the road to where the water of a spring flowed out of an iron pipe. There was a board over the spring, and I lifted it up and, knocking the corks firmly into the bottles, lowered them down into the water. It was so cold my hand and wrist felt numb. I put back the slab of wood and hoped nobody would find the wine. I got my rod that was leaning against the tree, took the bait can and landing net, and walked out into the dam. It was built to provide a head of water for driving logs. The gate was up, and I sat on one of the squared timbers and watched the smooth apron of water before the river tumbled into the falls. In the white water at the foot of the dam, it was deep. As I baited up, a trout shot up out of the white water into the falls and was carried down. Before I could finish baiting, another trout jumped at the falls, making the same lovely arc, disappearing into the water that was thundering down. I put on a good-sized sinker and dropped into the white water, close to the edge of the timbers of the dam. I did not feel the first trout strike. When I started to pull up, I felt that I had one and brought him, fighting and bending the rod almost double, out of the boiling water at the foot of the falls. and swung him up and onto the dam. He was a good trout, and I banged his head against the timber so that he quivered out straight, and then slipped him into my bag. While I had him on, several trout had jumped at the falls. As soon as I baited up and dropped in again, I hooked another and brought him in the same way. In a little while I had 6. They were all about the same size. I laid them out side by side, all their heads pointing the same way, and looked at them. They were beautifully colored and firm and hard from the cold water. It was a hot day, so I split them all and shucked out the insides, gills and all, and tossed them over across the river. I took the trout ashore, washed them in the cold, smoothly heavy water above the dam, and then picked some ferns and packed them all in the bag. 3 trout on a layer of ferns, then another layer of ferns, then 3 more trout, and then covered them with ferns. They looked nice in the ferns, and now the bag was bulky, and I put it in the shade of the tree. It was very hot on the dam, so I put my worm can in the shade with the bag, got a book out of the pack, and settled down under the tree to read until Bill should come up for lunch. It was a little past noon, and there was not much shade, but I sat against the trunk of 2 of the trees that grew together and read. The book was something by A.E.W. Mason, and I was reading a wonderful story about a man who had been frozen in the Alps, and then fallen into a glacier and disappeared, and his bride was going to wait 24 years exactly for his body to come out on the moraine, while their true love waited too. And they were still waiting when Bill came up. "Get any?" he asked. He had his rod and his bag and his net all in one hand. He was sweating. I hadn't heard him come up because of the noise from the dam. 6. What did you get? Bill sat down, opened his bag, laid out a big trout on the grass. He took up 3 more, each one a little bigger than the last, and laid them side by side in the shade from the tree. His face was sweaty and happy. "How are yours?" "Smaller." "Let's see them." "They're packed." "How big are they really?" "They're all about the size of your smallest." "You're not holding out on me." "I wish I were." "Get them all on worms?" "Yes." "You lazy bum." Bill put the trout in the bag and started for the river, swinging the open bag. He was wet from the waist down, and I knew he must have been wading the stream. I walked up the road and got out the 2 bottles of wine. They were cold. Moisture beaded on the bottles as I walked back to the trees. I spread the lunch on a newspaper and uncorked one of the bottles and leaned the other against a tree. Bill came up drying his hands, his bag plump with ferns. "Let's see that bottle," he said. He pulled the cork and tipped up the bottle and drank. "Ooh, that makes my eyes ache." "Let's try it." The wine was icy cold and tasted faintly rusty. "That's not such filthy wine," Bill said. "The cold helps it," I said. We unwrapped the little parcels of lunch. "Chicken." "There's hard-boiled eggs." "Find any salt?" "First the eggs," said Bill, "then the chicken. Even Brian could see that." "He's dead. I read it in the paper yesterday." "No, not really." "Yes, Brian's dead." Bill laid down the egg he was peeling. "Gentlemen," he said, and unwrapped a drumstick from a piece of newspaper. "I reversed the order, for Brian's sake, as a tribute to the great commoner. First the chicken, then the egg." "Wonder what day God created the chicken?" "Oh," said Bill, sucking the drumstick, "how should we know? We should not question. Our stay on earth is not for long. Let us rejoice and believe and give thanks. Eat an egg." Bill gestured with the drumstick in one hand and the bottle of wine in the other. "Let us rejoice in our blessings. Let us utilize the fowls of the air. Let us utilize the product of the vine. Will you utilize a little, brother?" "After you, brother." Bill took a long drink. "Utilize a little, brother." He handed me the bottle. "Let us not doubt, brother. Let us not pry into the holy mysteries of the hen coop with simian fingers. Let us accept on faith and simply say, 'I want you to join with me in saying.' What shall we say, brother?" He pointed the drumstick at me and went on. "Let me tell you, we will say, and I for one am proud to say, and I want you to say with me, on your knees, brother, Let no man be ashamed to kneel here in the great out of doors. Remember the woods were God's first temples. Let us kneel and say, 'Don't eat that, lady, that's Mencken.' Here," I said, "utilize a little of this." We uncorked the other bottle. "What's the matter?" I said. "Didn't you like Brian?" "I loved Brian," said Bill. "We were like brothers." "Where did you know him?" "He and Mencken and I went to Holy Cross together." "And Frankie Fritch?" "It's a lie. Frankie Fritch went to Fordham." "Well," I said, "I went to Loyola with Bishop Manning." "It's a lie," Bill said. "I went to Loyola with Bishop Manning myself." "You're cockeyed," I said. "On wine?" "Why not?" "It's the humidity," Bill said. "They ought to take this damn humidity away." "Have another shot." "Is this all we've got?" "Only the 2 bottles." "Do you know what you are?" Bill looked at the bottle affectionately. "No," I said. "You're in the pay of the Anti-Saloon League." "I went to Notre Dame with Wayne B. Wheeler." "It's a lie," said Bill. "I went to Austin Business College with Wayne B. Wheeler. He was class president." "Well," I said, "the saloon must go." "You're right there, old classmate," Bill said. "The saloon must go, and I will take it with me." "You're cockeyed." "On wine?" "On wine." "Well, maybe I am." "Want to take a nap?" "All right." We lay with our heads in the shade and looked up into the trees. "You asleep?" "No," Bill said. "I was thinking." I shut my eyes. It felt good lying on the ground. "Say," Bill said, "what about this Brett business?" "What about it?" "Were you ever in love with her?" "Sure." "For how long?" "Off and on for a hell of a long time." "Oh, hell," Bill said. "I'm sorry, fella." "It's all right," I said. "I don't give a damn anymore." "Really?" "Really. Only I'd a hell of a lot rather not talk about it." "You aren't sore I asked you?" "Why the hell should I be?" "I'm going to sleep," Bill said. He put a newspaper over his face. "Listen, Jake," he said. "Are you really a Catholic?" "Technically." "What does that mean?" "I don't know." "All right, I'll go to sleep now," he said. "Don't keep me awake by talking too much." I went to sleep too. When I woke up, Bill was packing the rucksack. It was late in the afternoon, and the shadow from the trees was long and went out over the dam. I was stiff from sleeping on the ground. "What did you do? Wake up?" Bill asked. "Why didn't you spend the night?" I stretched and rubbed my eyes. "I had a lovely dream," Bill said. "I don't remember what it was about, but it was a lovely dream. I don't think I dreamt." "You ought to dream," Bill said. "All our biggest businessmen have been dreamers. Look at Ford. Look at President Coolidge. Look at Rockefeller. Look at Joe Davidson." I disjointed my rod and bills and packed them in the rod case. I put the reels in the tackle bag. Bill had packed the rucksack, and we put one of the trout bags in. I carried the other. "Well," said Bill, "have we got everything?" "The worms." "Your worms. Put them in there." He had the pack on his back, and I put the worm cans in one of the outside flap pockets. "You got everything now?" I looked around on the grass at the foot of the elm trees. "Yes." We started up the road into the woods. It was a long walk home to Brigitte, and it was dark when we came down across the fields to the road, and along the road between the houses of the town, their windows lighted, to the inn. We stayed 5 days at Brigitte and had good fishing. The nights were cold and the days were hot. There was always a breeze even in the heat of the day. It was hot enough so that it felt good to wade in a cold stream, and the sun dried you when you came out and sat on the bank. We found a stream with a pool deep enough to swim in. In the evenings we played 3-handed bridge with an Englishman named Harris, who had walked over from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and was stopping at the inn for the fishing. He was very pleasant, and went with us twice to the Irati River. There was no word from Robert Cohn, nor from Brett and Mike. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. One morning I went down to breakfast, and the Englishman, Harris, was already at the table. He was reading the paper through his spectacles. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "Letter for you. I stopped at the post and they gave it to me with mine." The letter was at my place at the table, leaning against a coffee cup. Harris was reading the paper again. I opened the letter. It had been forwarded from Pamplona. It was dated San Sebastian, Sunday. "Dear Jake, we got here Friday. Brett passed out on the train, so brought her here for 3 days' rest with old friends of ours. We go to Montoya Hotel, Pamplona, Tuesday, arriving at I don't know what hour. Will you send a note by the bus to tell us what to do to rejoin you all on Wednesday? All our love, and sorry to be late, but Brett was really done in and will be quite all right by Tuesday, and is practically so now. I know her so well and try to look after her, but it's not so easy. Loved all the chaps. Michael." "What day of the week is it?" I asked Harris. "Wednesday, I think. Yes, quite Wednesday. Wonderful how one loses track of the days up here in the mountains." "Yes, we've been here nearly a week." "I hope you're not thinking of leaving." "Yes, we'll go in on the afternoon bus, I'm afraid." What a rotten business. I had hoped we'd all have another go at the Arati together. "We have to go into Pamplona. We're meeting people there." "What rotten luck for me. We've had a jolly time here at Brighette." "Come on in to Pamplona. We can play some bridge there. And there's going to be a damned fine fiesta." "I'd like to. Awfully nice of you to ask me. I'd best stop on here, though. I've not much more time to fish." "You want those big ones in the Arati?" "I say I do, you know. They're enormous trout there." "I'd like to try them once more." "Do stop over another day. Be a good chap." "We really have to get into town," I said. "What a pity." After breakfast, Bill and I were sitting warming in the sun on a bench out in front of the inn and talking it over. I saw a girl coming up the road from the center of the town. She stopped in front of us and took a telegram out of the leather wallet that hung against her skirt. "Por ustedes." I looked at it. The address was Barnes, Brighette. "Yes, it's for us." She brought out a book for me to sign, and I gave her a couple of coppers. The telegram was in Spanish. "Vengo jueves, con." I handed it to Bill. "What does the word con mean?" he asked. "What a lousy telegram," I said. "He could send 10 words for the same price. I come Thursday." That gives you a lot of dope, doesn't it? "It gives you all the dope that's of interest to Cohen." "We're going in anyway," I said. "There's no use trying to move Brett and Mike out here and back before the fiesta. Should we answer it?" "We might as well," said Bill. "There's no need for us to be snooty." We walked up to the post office and asked for a telegraph blank. "What will we say?" Bill asked. "Arriving tonight." That's enough. We paid for the message and walked back to the inn. Harris was there, and the 3 of us walked up to Roncesvalles. We went through the monastery. "It's a remarkable place," Harris said, when we came out. "But, you know, I'm not much on those sort of places." "Me either," Bill said. "It's a remarkable place, though," Harris said. "I wouldn't not have seen it. I've been intending coming up each day." "It isn't the same as fishing, though, is it?" Bill asked. He liked Harris. I say not. We were standing in front of the old chapel of the monastery. "Isn't that a pub across the way?" Harris asked. "Or do my eyes deceive me?" "It has the look of a pub," Bill said. "It looks to me like a pub," I said. "I say," said Harris, "let's utilize it." He'd taken up utilizing from Bill. We had a bottle of wine apiece. Harris would not let us pay. He talked Spanish quite well, and the innkeeper would not take our money. I say, you don't know what it's meant to me to have you chaps up here. We've had a grand time, Harris. Harris was a little tight. I say, really, you don't know how much it means. I've not had much fun since the war. We'll fish together again, sometime. Don't you forget it, Harris. We must. We have had such a jolly good time. How about another bottle around? Jolly good idea, said Harris. This is mine, said Bill, or we don't drink it. I wish you'd let me pay for it. It does give me pleasure, you know. This is going to give me pleasure, Bill said. The innkeeper brought in the 4th bottle. We kept the same glasses. Harris lifted his glass. I say, you know this does utilize well. Bill slapped him on the back. Good old Harris. I say, you know, my name isn't really Harris, it's Wilson Harris. All one name, with a hyphen, you know. Good old Wilson Harris, Bill said. We call you Harris because we're so fond of you. I say, Barnes, you don't know what this all means to me. Come on and utilize another glass, I said. Barnes, really, Barnes, you can't know. That's all. Drink up, Harris. We walked back down the road from Roncesvalles with Harris between us. We had lunch at the inn, and Harris went with us to the bus. He gave us his card, with his address in London and his club and his business address, and as we got on the bus, he handed us each an envelope. I opened mine, and there were a dozen flies in it. Harris had tied them himself. He tied all his own flies. I say, Harris, I began. No, he said. He was climbing down from the bus. They're not first-rate flies at all. I only thought if you fished them sometime, it might remind you of what a good time we had. The bus started. Harris stood in front of the post office. He waved. As we started along the road, he turned and walked back toward the inn. Say, wasn't that Harris nice, Bill said. I think he really did have a good time. Harris? You bet he did. I wish he'd come into Pamplona. You wanted to fish? Yes, you couldn't tell how English would mix with each other anyway. I suppose not. We got into Pamplona late in the afternoon, and the bus stopped in front of the Hotel Montoya. Out in the plaza, they were stringing electric light wires to light the plaza for the fiesta. A few kids came up when the bus stopped, and a custom officer for the town made all the people getting down from the bus open their bundles on the sidewalk. We went into the hotel, and on the stairs I met Montoya. He shook hands with us, smiling in his embarrassed way. Your friends are here, he said. Mr. Campbell. Yes, Mr. Cohn and Mr. Campbell and Lady Ashley. He smiled as though there was something I would hear about. When did they get in? Yesterday. I saved you the rooms you had. That's fine. Did you give Mr. Campbell the room on the plaza? Yes, all the rooms we looked at. Where are our friends now? I think they went to the Pelota. And how about the Bulls? Montoya smiled. Tonight, he said. Tonight at 7 o'clock, they bring in the Villar Bulls. And tomorrow come the Miuras. Do you all go down? Oh, yes, they've never seen a Desenca Jornada. Montoya put his hand on my shoulder. I'll see you there. He smiled again. He always smiled as though bullfighting were a very special secret between the two of us. A rather shocking but really very deep secret that we knew about. He always smiled as though there were something lewd about the secret to outsiders, but that it was something that we understood. It would not do to expose it to people who would not understand. Your friend, is he aficionado, too? Montoya smiled at Bill. Yes, he came all the way from New York to see the San Fermines. Yes? Montoya politely disbelieved. But he's not aficionado like you. He put his hand on my shoulder again, embarrassedly. Yes, I said, he's a real aficionado. But he's not aficionado like you are. Afición means passion. An aficionado is one who is passionate about the bullfights. All the good bullfighters stayed at Montoya's hotel. That is, those with afición stayed there. The commercial bullfighters stayed once, perhaps, and then did not come back. The good ones came each year. In Montoya's room were their photographs. The photographs were dedicated to Juanito Montoya or to his sister. The photographs of bullfighters Montoya had really believed in were framed. Photographs of bullfighters who had been without afición Montoya kept in a drawer of his desk. They often had the most flattering inscriptions, but they did not mean anything. One day Montoya took them all out and dropped them in the wastebasket. He did not want them around. We often talked about bulls and bullfighters. I'd stopped at the Montoya for several years. We never talked for very long at a time. It was simply the pleasure of discovering what we each felt. Men would come in from distant towns, and before they left Pamplona, stop and talk for a few minutes with Montoya about bulls. These men were aficionados. Those who were aficionados could always get rooms, even when the hotel was full. Montoya introduced me to some of them. They were always very polite at first, and it amused them very much that I should be an American. Somehow it was taken for granted that an American could not have afición. He might simulate it or confuse it with excitement, but he could not really have it. When they saw that I had afición, and there was no password, no set questions that could bring it out, rather it was a sort of oral spiritual examination with the questions always a little on the defensive and never apparent. There was the same embarrassed putting the hand on the shoulder, or a buen hombre. But nearly always there was the actual touching. It seemed as though they wanted to touch you to make it certain. Montoya could forgive anything of a bullfighter who had afición. He could forgive attacks of nerves, panic, bad unexplainable actions, all sorts of lapses. For one who had afición, he could forgive anything. At once he forgave me all my friends. Without his ever saying anything, they were simply a little something shameful between us, like the spilling open of the horses in bullfighting. Bill had gone upstairs as we came in, and I found him washing and changing in his room. "Well," he said, "talk a lot of Spanish." He was telling me about the bulls coming in tonight. "Let's find the gang and go down." "All right. They'll probably be at the cafe." "Have you got tickets?" "Yes, I got them for all the unloadings." "What's it like?" He was pulling his cheek before the glass, looking to see if there were unshaved patches under the line of the jaw. "It's pretty good," I said. "They let the bulls out of the cages one at a time, and they have steers in the corral to receive them and keep them from fighting. And the bulls tear in at the steers, and the steers run around like old maids trying to quiet them down." "Do they ever gore the steers?" "Sure. Sometimes they go right after them and kill them." "Can't the steers do anything?" "No, they're trying to make friends." "What did they have them in for?" "To quiet down the bulls and keep them from breaking their horns against the stone walls or goring each other." "Must be swell being a steer." We went down the stairs and out of the door and walked across the square toward the Café Iruña. There were two lonely-looking ticket houses standing in the square. Their windows marked Sol, Sol y Sombra, and Sombra were shut. They would not open until the day before the fiesta. Across the square, the white wicker tables and chairs of the Iruña extended out beyond the arcade to the edge of the street. I looked for Brett and Mike at the tables. They were there, Brett and Mike and Robert Cohn. Brett was wearing a Basque beret. So was Mike. Robert Cohn was bareheaded and wearing his spectacles. Brett saw us coming and waved. Her eyes crinkled up as we came to the table. "Hello, you chaps," she called. Brett was happy. Mike had a way of getting an intensity of feeling into shaking hands. Robert Cohn shook hands because we were back. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked. "I brought them up here," Cohn said. "What rot," Brett said. "We'd have gotten here earlier if you hadn't come." "You'd never have gotten here." "What rot. You chaps are brown. Look at Bill." "Did you get good fishing?" Mike asked. "We wanted to join you." "Wasn't bad. We missed you." "I wanted to come," Cohn said, "but I thought I ought to bring them." "You bring us? What rot." "Was it really good?" Mike asked. "Did you take many?" "Some days we took a dozen apiece. There was an Englishman up there." "Named Harris," Bill said. "Ever know him, Mike? He was in the war, too." "Fortunate fellow," Mike said. "What times we had." "How I wish those dear days were back." "Don't be an ass." "Were you in the war, Mike?" Cohn asked. "Was I not?" "He was a very distinguished soldier," Brett said. "Tell them about the time your horse bolted down Piccadilly." "I'll not. I've told that 4 times. "You never told me," Robert Cohn said. "I'll not tell that story. It reflects discredit on me." "Tell them about your medals." "I'll not. That story reflects great discredit on me." "What story's that?" "Brett will tell you. She tells all the stories that reflect discredit on me." "Go on, tell it, Brett." "Should I? I'll tell it myself. What medals have you got, Mike?" "I haven't got any medals." "You must have some." "I suppose I've the usual medals, but I never sent in for them. One time there was this whopping big dinner, and the Prince of Wales was to be there, and the card said medals will be worn. So naturally I had no medals, and I stopped at my tailor's, and he was impressed by the invitation. And I thought that's a good piece of business, and I said to him, "You've got to fix me up with some medals." He said, "What medals, sir?" And I said, "Oh, any medals, just give me a few medals." So he said, "What medals have you, sir?" And I said, "How should I know? Did he think I spent all my time reading the bloody Gazette?" "Just give me a good lot. Pick them out yourself." So he got me some medals, miniature medals, and handed me the box. And I put it in my pocket and forgot it. Well, I went to the dinner, and it was the night they'd shot Henry Wilson, so the prince didn't come, and the king didn't come, and no one wore any medals, and all these coves were busy taking off their medals, and I had mine in my pocket. He stopped for us to laugh. "Is that all?" "That's all. Perhaps I didn't tell it right." "You didn't," said Brett, "but no matter. We were all laughing." "Ah, yes," said Mike, "I know now. It was a damn dull dinner, and I couldn't stick it, so I left. Later on in the evening, I found the box in my pocket. "What's this?" I said. "Medals. Bloody military medals?" So I cut them all off their backing. They put them on a strip, and gave them all around. Gave one to each girl. Form a souvenir. They thought I was hell's own shakes of a soldier. Give away medals in a nightclub. Dashing fellow. "Tell the rest," Brett said. "Don't you think that was funny?" Mike asked. We were all laughing. It was. I swear it was. Any rate, my tailor wrote me and wanted the medals back. Sent a man around. Kept on writing for months. Seemed some chap had left them to be cleaned. Frightfully military cove. Set hell's own store by them. Mike paused. "Rotten luck for the tailor," he said. "You don't mean it," Bill said. "I should think it would have been grand for the tailor." "Frightfully good tailor. Never believe it to see me now," Mike said. "I used to pay him £100 a year just to keep him quiet, so he wouldn't send me any bills. Frightful blow to him when I went bankrupt. Was right after the medals. Gave his letters rather a bitter tone." "How did you go bankrupt?" Bill asked. "Two ways," Mike said. "Gradually and then suddenly." "What brought it on?" "Friends," said Mike. "I had a lot of friends. False friends. Then I had creditors, too. Probably had more creditors than anybody in England." "Tell them about in the court," Brett said. "I don't remember," Mike said. "I was just a little tight." "Tight?" Brett exclaimed. "You were blind." "Extraordinary thing," Mike said. "Met my former partner the other day. Offered to buy me a drink." "Tell them about your learned counsel," Brett said. "I will not," Mike said. "My learned counsel was blind, too. I say, this is a gloomy subject. Are we going down and see these bulls unloaded or not?" "Let's go down." We called the waiter, paid, and started to walk through the town. I started off walking with Brett, but Robert Cohn came up and joined her on the other side. The three of us walked along, past the Ayuntamiento, with the banners hung from the balcony, down past the market, and down past the steep street that led to the bridge across the Arga. There were many people walking to go and see the bulls, and carriages drove down the hill and across the bridge, the drivers, the horses, and the whips rising above the walking people in the street. Across the bridge we turned up a road to the corrals. We passed a wine shop with a sign in the window. "Good wine, 30 centimes a liter." "That's where we'll go when funds get low," Brett said. The woman standing in the door of the wine shop looked at us as we passed. She called into someone in the house, and 3 girls came to the window and stared. They were staring at Brett. At the gate of the corrals, 2 men took tickets from the people that went in. We went in through the gate. There were trees inside and a low stone house. At the far end was the stone wall of the corrals, with apertures in the stone that were like loopholes running all along the face of each corral. A ladder led up to the top of the wall, and people were climbing up the ladder and spreading down to stand on the walls that separated the 2 corrals. As we came up the ladder, walking across the grass under the trees, we passed the big gray painted cages with the bulls in them. There was 1 bull in each traveling box. They had come by train from a bull breeding ranch in Castile, and had been unloaded off flat cars at the station and brought up here to be let out of their cages into the corrals. Each cage was stenciled with the name and the brand of the bull breeder. We climbed up and found a place on the wall looking down into the corral. The stone walls were whitewashed, and there was straw on the ground and wooden feed boxes and water troughs set against the wall. "Look up there," I said. Beyond the river rose the plateau of the town. All along the old walls and ramparts people were standing. The 3 lines of fortifications made 3 black lines of people. Above the walls there were heads in the windows of the houses. At the far end of the plateau, boys had climbed into the trees. "They must think something is going to happen," Brett said. "They want to see the bulls." Mike and Bill were on the other wall across the pit of the corral. They waved to us. People who'd come late were standing behind us, pressing against us when other people crowded them. "Why don't they start?" Robert Cohen asked. A single mule was hitched to one of the cages and dragged it up against the gate in the corral wall. The men shoved and lifted it with crowbars into position against the gate. Men were standing on the wall ready to pull up the gate of the corral, and then the gate of the cage. The other end of the corral, a gate opened, and 2 steers came in, swaying their heads and trotting, their lean flanks swinging. They stood together at the far end, their heads toward the gate where the bull would enter. "They don't look happy," Brett said. The men on top of the wall leaned back and pulled up the door of the corral. Then they pulled up the door of the cage. I leaned way over the wall and tried to see into the cage. It was dark. Someone rapped on the cage with an iron bar. Inside, something seemed to explode. The bull, striking into the wood from side to side with his horns, made a great noise. Then I saw a dark muzzle and the shadow of horns, and then, with a clattering on the wood in the hollow box, the bull charged and came out into the corral, skidding with his forefeet in the straw as he stopped, his head up, the great hump of muscle on his neck swollen tight, his body muscles quivering as he looked up at the crowd on the stone walls. The 2 steers backed away against the wall, their heads sunken, their eyes watching the bull. The bull saw them and charged. A man shouted from behind one of the boxes and slapped his hat against the planks, and the bull, before he reached the steer, turned, gathered himself, and charged where the man had been, trying to reach him behind the planks with a half-dozen quick, searching drives with the right horn. "My God, isn't he beautiful?" Brett said. We were looking right down on him. "Look how he knows how to use his horns," I said. "He's got a left and a right, just like a boxer." "Not really. You watch. It goes too fast. Wait, there'll be another one in a minute." They had backed up another cage into the entrance. In the far corner, a man, from behind one of the plank shelters, attracted the bull. While the bull was facing away, the gate was pulled up, and a second bull came out into the corral. He charged straight for the steers, and 2 men ran out from behind the planks and shouted to turn him. He did not change his direction, and the men shouted, "Ha! Ha! Toro!" and waved their arms. The 2 steers turned sideways to take the shock, and the bull drove into one of the steers. "Don't look," I said to Brett. She was watching, fascinated. "Fine," I said, "if it doesn't buck you." "I saw it," she said. "I saw him shift from his left to his right horn." "Damn good." The steer was down now, his neck stretched out, his head twisted. He lay the way he had fallen. Suddenly the bull left off and made for the other steer, which had been standing at the far end, his head swinging, watching it all. The steer ran awkwardly, and the bull caught him, hooked him lightly in the flank, and then turned away and looked up at the crowd on the walls, his crest of muscle rising. The steer came up to him and made as though to nose at him, and the bull hooked, perfunctorily. The next time he nosed at the steer, and then the 2 of them trotted over to the other bull. When the next bull came out, all 3, the 2 bulls and the steer, stood together, their heads side by side, their horns against the newcomer. In a few minutes the steer picked the new bull up, quieted him down, and made him one of the herd. When the last 2 bulls had been unloaded, the herd were all together. The steer who had been gored had gotten to his feet and stood against the stone wall. None of the bulls came near him, and he did not attempt to join the herd. We climbed down from the wall with the crowd, and had a last look at the bulls through the holes in the wall of the corral. Through the loopholes in the wall of the corral. They were all quiet now, their heads down. We got a carriage outside and rode up to the cafe. Mike and Bill came in half an hour later. They had stopped on the way for several drinks. We were sitting in the cafe. "That's an extraordinary business," Brett said. "Will those last ones fight as well as the first?" Robert Cohn asked. "They seem to quiet down awfully fast." "They all know each other," I said. "They're only dangerous when they're alone, or only 2 or 3 of them together." "What do you mean dangerous?" Bill said. "They all look dangerous to me." "They only want to kill when they're alone. Of course, if you went in there, you'd probably detach one of them from the herd, and he'd be dangerous." "That's too complicated," Bill said. "Don't you ever detach me from the herd, Mike?" "I say," Mike said, "they were fine bulls, weren't they? Did you see the horns?" "Did I not?" said Brett. "I had no idea what they were like." "Did you see the one hit that steer?" Mike asked. "That was extraordinary." "It's no life being a steer," Robert Cohn said. "Don't you think so?" Mike said. "I would have thought you'd love being a steer, Robert." "What do you mean, Mike?" "They lead such a quiet life. They never say anything, and they're always hanging about so." We were embarrassed. Bill laughed. Robert Cohn was angry. Mike went on talking. "I should think you'd love it. You never have to say a word. Come on, Robert, do say something. Don't just sit there." "I said something, Mike. Don't you remember? About the steers." "Oh, say something more. Say something funny. Can't you see we're all having a good time here?" "Come off it, Michael. You're drunk," Brett said. "I'm not drunk. I'm quite serious. Is Robert Cohn going to follow Brett around like a steer all the time?" "Shut up, Michael. Try and show a little breeding." "Breeding be damned. Who is any breeding, anyway, except the bulls?" "Aren't the bulls lovely? Don't you like them, Bill? Why don't you say something, Robert? Don't sit there looking like a bloody funeral. What if Brett did sleep with you? She slept with lots of better people than you." "Shut up," Cohn said. He stood up. "Shut up, Mike. Oh, don't stand up and act as though you were going to hit me. That won't make any difference to me. Tell me, Robert, why do you follow Brett around like a poor bloody steer? Don't you know you're not wanted?" "I know when I'm not wanted." "Why don't you know when you're not wanted? You came down to San Sebastian where you weren't wanted and followed Brett around like a bloody steer. Do you think that's right?" "Shut up. You're drunk." "Perhaps I am drunk. Why aren't you drunk? Why don't you ever get drunk, Robert? You know you didn't have a good time at San Sebastian because none of our friends would invite you on any of the parties. You can't blame them hardly, can you? I asked them to. They wouldn't do it. You can't blame them now, can you? Now answer me. Can you blame them?" "Go to hell, Mike. I can't blame them. Can you blame them? Why do you follow Brett around? Haven't you any manners? How do you think it makes me feel?" "You're a splendid one to talk about manners," Brett said. "You've such lovely manners." "Come on, Robert," Bill said. "What do you follow her around for?" Bill stood up and took hold of Cohn. "Don't go," Mike said. "Robert Cohn's going to buy a drink." Bill went off with Cohn. Cohn's face was sallow. Mike went on talking. I sat and listened for a while. Brett looked disgusted. "I say, Michael, you might not be such a bloody ass," she interrupted. "I'm not saying he's not right, you know." She turned to me. The emotion left Mike's voice. We were all friends together. "I'm not so damn drunk as I sounded," he said. "I know you're not," Brett said. "We're none of us sober," I said. "I didn't say anything I didn't mean." "But you put it so badly," Brett laughed. "He was an ass, though. He came down to San Sebastian where he damn well wasn't wanted. He hung around Brett and just looked at her. It made me damn well sick." "He did behave very badly," Brett said. "Marky, Brett's had affairs with men before. She tells me all about everything. She gave me this chap Cohn's letters to read. I wouldn't read them." "Damn noble of you." "No, listen, Jake. Brett's gone off with men, but they weren't ever Jews, and they didn't come and hang about afterwards." "Damn good chaps," Brett said. "It's all right to talk about it. Michael and I understand each other." "She gave me Robert Cohn's letters. I wouldn't read them." "You wouldn't read any letters, darling. You wouldn't read mine." "I can't read letters," Mike said. "Funny, isn't it? You can't read anything." "No, you're wrong there. I read quite a bit. I read when I'm at home." "You'll be writing next," Brett said. "Come on, Michael, do buck up. You've got to go through with this thing now. He's here. Don't spoil the fiesta." "Well, let him behave, then." "He'll behave. I'll tell him." You tell him, Jake. Tell him either he must behave or get out. Yes, I said, it would be nice for me to tell him. Look, Brett, tell Jake what Robert calls you. That is perfect, you know. Oh, no, I can't. Go on, we're all friends. Aren't we all friends, Jake? I can't tell him. It's too ridiculous. I'll tell him. You won't, Michael. Don't be an ass. He calls her Circe. Mike said he claims she turns men into swine. Damn good. I wish I were one of these literary chaps. He'd be good, you know, Brett said. He writes a good letter. I know, I said. He wrote me from San Sebastian. That was nothing, Brett said. He can write a damned amusing letter. She made me write that. She was supposed to be ill. I damned well was, too. Come on, I said. We must go in and eat. How should I meet Cohen, Mike said. Just act as though nothing had happened. It's quite all right with me, Mike said. I'm not embarrassed. If he says anything, just say you were tight. Quite. And the funny thing is I think I was tight. Come on, Brett said. Are these poisonous things paid for? I must bathe before dinner. We walked across the square. It was dark, and all around the square were the lights from the cafes under the arcades. We walked across the gravel under the trees to the hotel. They went upstairs, and I stopped to speak with Montoya. Well, how did you like the bulls? He asked. Good. They were nice bulls. They're all right. Montoya shook his head, but they're not too good. What didn't you like about them? I don't know. They just didn't give me the feeling that they were so good. I know what you mean. They're all right. Yes, they're all right. How did your friends like them? Fine. Good, Montoya said. I went upstairs. Bill was in his room standing on the balcony looking out at the square. I stood beside him. Where's Cohen? Upstairs, in his room. How does he feel? Like hell, naturally. Mike was awful. He's terrible when he's tight. He wasn't so tight. The hell he wasn't. I know what we had before we came to the cafe. He sobered up afterward. Good. He was terrible. I don't like Cohen, God knows, and I think it was a silly trick for him to go down to San Sebastian, but nobody has any business to talk like Mike. How'd you like the bulls? Grand. It's grand the way they bring them out. Tomorrow come the Miuras. When does the fiesta start? Day after tomorrow. We've got to keep Mike from getting so tight. That kind of stuff is terrible. We'd better get cleaned up for supper. Yes, that will be a pleasant meal, won't it? As a matter of fact, supper was a pleasant meal. Brett wore a black sleeveless evening gown. She looked quite beautiful. Mike acted as though nothing had happened. I had to go up and bring Robert Cohen down. He was reserved and formal, and his face was still taut and sallow, but he cheered up finally. Could not stop looking at Brett. It seemed to make him happy. Must have been pleasant for him to see her looking so lovely, and know he had been away with her and that everyone knew it. They could not take that away from him. It was very funny. So was Michael. They were good together. It was like certain dinners I remember from the war. There was much wine, and ignored tension, and a feeling of things coming that you could not prevent happening. Under the wine I lost the disgusted feeling, and was happy. It seemed they were all such nice people. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I do not know what time I got to bed. I remember undressing, putting on a bathrobe, and standing out on the balcony. I knew I was quite drunk, and when I came in I put on the light over the head of the bed and started to read. I was reading a book by Turgenev. Probably I read the same 2 pages over several times. It was one of the stories in a sportsman's sketches. I'd read it before, but it seemed quite new. The country became very clear, and the feeling of pressure in my head seemed to loosen. I was very drunk, and I did not want to shut my eyes because the room would go round and round. If I kept on reading, that feeling would pass. I heard Brett and Robert Cohen come up the stairs. Cone said good night outside the door and went on up to his room. I heard Brett go into the room next door. Mike was already in bed. He had come in with me an hour before. He woke as she came in, and they talked together. I heard them laugh. I turned off the light and tried to go to sleep. It was not necessary to read anymore. I could shut my eyes without getting the wheeling sensation. But I could not sleep. There's no reason why, because it is dark, you should look at things differently from when it is light. The hell it isn't. I figured that all out once, and for 6 months I never slept with the electric light off. That was another bright idea. To hell with women, anyway. To hell with you, Brett Ashley. Women make such swell friends. Awfully swell. In the first place, you had to be in love with a woman to have a basis of friendship. I'd been having Brett for a friend. I had not been thinking about her side of it. I had been getting something for nothing. That only delayed the presentation of the bill. The bill always came. That was one of the swell things you could count on. I thought I had paid for everything, not like the woman pays and pays and pays. No idea of retribution or punishment. Just exchange of values. You gave up something and got something else, or you worked for something. You paid some way for everything that was any good. I paid my way into enough things that I liked so that I had a good time. Either you paid by learning about them, or by experience, or by taking chances, or by money. Enjoying living was learning to get your money's worth, and knowing when you had it, you could get your money's worth. The world was a good place to buy in. It seemed like a fine philosophy. In 5 years, I thought, it will seem just as silly as all the other fine philosophies I've had. Perhaps that wasn't true, though. Perhaps as you went along, you did learn something. I did not care what it was all about. All I wanted to know was how to live in it. Maybe if you found out how to live in it, you learned from that what it was all about. I wished Mike would not behave so terribly to Cone, though. Mike was a bad drunk. Brett was a good drunk. Bill was a good drunk. Cone was never drunk. Mike was unpleasant after he passed a certain point. I liked to see him hurt Cone. I wished he would not do it, though, because afterward it made me disgusted in myself. That was morality, things that made you disgusted afterward. No, that must be immorality. That was a large statement. What a lot of bilge I could think up at night. What rot. I could hear Brett say it. What rot. When you were with English, you got into the habit of using English expressions in your thinking. The English spoken language, the upper classes anyway, must have fewer words than the Eskimo. Of course I didn't know anything about the Eskimo. Maybe the Eskimo was a fine language. Say the Cherokee. I didn't know anything about the Cherokee either. The English talked with inflected phrases, one phrase to mean everything. I liked them, though. I liked the way they talked. Take Harris. Still, Harris was not the upper classes. I turned on the light again and read. I read the Turgenev. I knew that now, reading it in the oversensitized state of mind after much too much brandy, I would remember it somewhere, and afterward it would seem as though it really happened to me. I would always have it. That was another good thing you paid for and then had. Sometime along toward daylight, I went to sleep. The next 2 days in Pamplona were quiet, and there were no more rows. The town was getting ready for the fiesta. Workmen put up the gate posts that were to shut off the side streets when the bulls were released from the corrals and came running through the streets in the morning on their way to the ring. The workmen dug holes and fitted in the timbers, each timber numbered for its regular place. Out on the plateau beyond the town, employees of the bull ring exercised picador horses, galloping them stiff-legged on the hard sun-baked fields behind the bull ring. The big gate of the bull ring was open, and inside, the amphitheater was being swept. The ring was rolled and sprinkled, and carpenters replaced weakened or cracked planks in the barrera. Standing at the edge of the smooth-rolled sand, you could look up into the empty stands and see old women sweeping out the boxes. Outside, the fence that led from the last street of the town to the entrance of the bull ring was already in place and made a long pen. The crowd would come running down with the bulls behind them on the morning of the day of the first bullfight. Out across the plain, where the horse and cattle fair would be, some gypsies had camped under the trees. The wine and aguardiente sellers were putting up their booths. One booth advertised Anis del Toro. The cloth sign hung against the planks in the hot sun. In the big square that was the center of the town, there was no change yet. We sat in the white wicker chairs on the terrace of the cafe and watched the motor buses come in and unload peasants from the country coming into the market. We watched the buses fill up and start out with peasants sitting with their saddlebags full of the things they had bought in town. The tall gray motor buses were the only life of the square, except for the pigeons and the man with the hose who sprinkled the graveled square and watered the streets. In the evening was the paseo. For an hour after dinner, everyone, all the good-looking girls, the officers from the garrison, all the fashionable people of the town, walked in the street on one side of the square, while the cafe tables filled with the regular after-dinner crowd. During the morning, I usually sat in the cafe and read the Madrid papers and then walked in the town or out into the country. Sometimes Bill went along. Sometimes he wrote in his room. Robert Cohn spent the mornings studying Spanish or trying to get a shave at the barber shop. Brett and Mike never got up until noon. We all had a vermouth at the cafe. It was a quiet life, and no one was drunk. I went to church a couple of times, once with Brett. She said she wanted to hear me go to confession. But I told her not only was it impossible, but it was not as interesting as it sounded. Besides, it would be in a language she did not know. We met Cohn as we came out of the church, and although it was obvious he had followed us, yet he was very pleasant and nice, and we all three went for a walk out to the gypsy camp, and Brett had her fortune told. It was a good morning. There were high white clouds above the mountains. It had rained a little in the night, and it was fresh and cool on the plateau, and there was a wonderful view. We all felt good, and we felt healthy, and I felt quite friendly to Cohn. We could not be upset about anything on a day like that. That was the last day before the fiesta. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. At noon of Sunday, the 6th of July, the fiesta exploded. There's no other way to describe it. People had been coming in all day from the country, but they were assimilated in the town, and you did not notice them. The square was as quiet in the hot sun as on any other day. The peasants were in the outlying wine shops. There they were drinking, getting ready for the fiesta. They had come in so recently from the plains and the hills that it was necessary that they make their shifting in values gradually. They could not start in paying cafe prices. They got their money's worth in the wine shops. Money still had a definite value in hours worked and bushels of grain sold. Late in the fiesta, it would not matter what they paid, nor where they bought. Now, on the day of the starting of the fiesta of San Fermin, they had been in the wine shops of the narrow streets of the town since early morning. Going down the streets in the morning on the way to Mass in the cathedral, I heard them singing through the open doors of the shops. They were warming up. There were many people at the 11 o'clock Mass. San Fermin is also a religious festival. I walked down the hill from the cathedral and up the street to the cafe on the square. It was a little before noon. Robert Cohn and Bill were sitting at one of the tables. The marble-topped tables and the white wicker chairs were gone. They were replaced by cast-iron tables and severe folding chairs. The cafe was like a battleship, stripped for action. Today, the waiters did not leave you alone all morning to read without asking if you wanted to order something. A waiter came up as soon as I sat down. "What are you drinking?" I asked Bill and Robert. "Sherry," Cohn said. "Sherries," I said to the waiter. Before the waiter brought the sherry, the rocket that announced the fiesta went up in the square. It burst, and there was a gray ball of smoke high up above the Theatre Gaillard, across on the other side of the plaza. The ball of smoke hung in the sky like a shrapnel burst, and as I watched, another rocket came up to it, trickling smoke in the bright sunlight. I saw the bright flash as it burst, and another little cloud of smoke appeared. By the time the second rocket had burst, there were so many people in the arcade that had been empty a minute before that the waiter, holding the bottle high up over his head, could hardly get through the crowd to our table. People were coming into the square from all sides. Down the street we heard the pipes and the fifes and the drums coming. They were playing the riau riau music, the pipes shrill and the drums pounding, and behind them came the men and boys dancing. When the fifers stopped, they all crouched down in the street, and when the reed pipes and the fifes shrilled, and the flat, dry, hollow drums tapped it out again, they all went up in the air, dancing. In the crowd you saw only the heads and shoulders of the dancers going up and down. In the square a man, bent over, was playing on a reed pipe, and a crowd of children were following him, shouting and pulling at his clothes. He came out of the square, the children following him, and piped them past the cafe and down a side street. We saw his blank, pock-marked face as he went by, piping, the children close behind him shouting and pulling at him. "You must be the village idiot," Bill said. "My God, look at that." Down the street came dancers. The street was solid with dancers, all men. They were all dancing in time behind their own fifers and drummers. They were a club of some sort, and all wore workmen's blue smocks and red handkerchiefs around their necks, and carried a great banner on 2 poles. The banner danced up and down with them as they came down, surrounded by the crowd. "Hooray for wine! Hooray for the foreigners!" was painted on the banner. "Where are the foreigners?" Robert Cohen asked. "We're the foreigners," Bill said. All the time rockets were going up. The cafe tables were all full now. The square was emptying of people, and the crowd was filling the cafes. "Where's Brett and Mike?" Bill asked. "I'll go and get them," Cohen said. "Bring them here." The fiesta was really started. It kept up day and night for 7 days. The dancing kept up. The drinking kept up. The noise went on. The things that happened could only have happened during a fiesta. Everything became quite unreal finally, and it seemed as though nothing could have any consequences. It seemed out of place to think of consequences during the fiesta. While during the fiesta you had the feeling, even when it was quiet, that you had to shout any remark to make it heard. It was the same feeling about any action. It was a fiesta, and it went on for 7 days. That afternoon was the big religious procession. San Fermin was translated from one church to another. In the procession were all the dignitaries, civil and religious. We could not see them because the crowd was too great. Ahead of the formal procession and behind it danced the riau riau dancers. There was one mass of yellow shirts dancing up and down in the crowd. All we could see of the procession, through the closely pressed people that crowded all the side streets and curbs, were the great giants, cigar store Indians 30 feet high, Moors, a king and queen, whirling and waltzing solemnly to the riau riau. They were all standing outside the chapel where San Fermin and the dignitaries had passed in leaving a guard of soldiers, the giants, with the men who danced in them standing beside their resting frames, and the dwarfs moving with their whacking bladders through the crowd. We started inside, and there was a smell of incense and people filing back into the church. But Brett was stopped just inside the door because she had no hat. So we went out again and along the street that ran back from the chapel into town. The street was lined on both sides with people keeping their place at the curb for the return of the procession. Some dancers formed a circle around Brett and started to dance. They wore big wreaths of white garlics around their necks. They took Bill and me by the arms and put us in the circle. Bill started to dance too. They were all chanting. Brett wanted to dance, but they did not want her to. They wanted her as an image to dance around. When the song ended with the sharp riau riau, they rushed us into a wine shop. We stood at the counter. They had Brett seated on a wine cask. It was dark in the wine shop and full of men singing, hard-voiced singing. Back at the counter, they drew the wine from casks. I put down money for the wine, but one of the men picked it up and put it back in my pocket. "I want a leather wine bottle," Bill said. "There is a place down the street," I said. I'll go get a couple." The dancers did not want me to go out. 3 of them were sitting on the high wine cask beside Brett, teaching her to drink out of the wineskins. They had hung a wreath of garlics around her neck. Someone insisted on giving her a glass. Somebody was teaching Bill a song, singing it into his ear, beating time on Bill's back. I explained to them that I would be back. Outside in the street, I went down the street looking for the shop that made leather wine bottles. The crowd was packed on the sidewalks, and many of the shops were shuttered, and I could not find it. I walked as far as the church, looking on both sides of the street. Then I asked a man, and he took me by the arm and led me to it. The shutters were up, but the door was open. Inside it smelled of fresh tan leather and hot tar. A man was stenciling completed wineskins. They hung up from the roof in bunches. He took one down, blew it up, screwed the nozzle tight, and then jumped on it. "See, it doesn't leak." I want another one, too, a big one. He took down a big one that would hold a gallon or more from the roof. He blew it up, his cheeks puffing ahead of the wineskin, and stood on the boat holding on to a chair. "What are you going to do? Sell them in Bayonne?" "No, drink out of them." He slapped me on the back. "Good man. 8 pesetas for the 2, the lowest price." The man who was stenciling the new ones and tossing them into a pile stopped. "It's true," he said. 8 pesetas is cheap." I paid and went out, and along the street back to the wine shop. It was darker than ever inside and very crowded. I did not see Brett and Bill, and someone said they were in the back room. At the counter, the girl filled the 2 wineskins for me. One held 2 liters. The other held 5 liters. Filling them both cost 3 pesetas 60 centimos. Someone at the counter that I had never seen before tried to pay for the wine, but I finally paid for it myself. The man who wanted to pay then bought me a drink. He would not let me buy one in return, but said he would take a rinse of the mouth from the new wine bag. He tipped the big 5-liter bag up and squeezed it so the wine hissed against the back of his throat. "All right," he said, and handed back the bag. In the back room, Brett and Bill were sitting on barrels surrounded by the dancers. Everybody had his arms on everybody else's shoulders, and they were all singing. Mike was sitting at a table with several men in their shirt sleeves, eating from a bowl of tuna fish, chopped onions, and vinegar. They were all drinking wine and mopping up the oil and vinegar with pieces of bread. "Hello, Jake." "Hello," Mike called. "Come here, I want you to meet my friends. We're all having an hors d'oeuvre." I was introduced to the people at the table. They supplied their names to Mike and sent for a fork for me. "Stop eating their dinner, Michael," Brett shouted from the wine barrels. "I don't want to eat up your meal," I said, when someone handed me a fork. "Eat," he said. "What do you think it's here for?" I unscrewed the nozzle of the big wine bottle and handed it around. Everyone took a drink, tipping the wineskin at arm's length. Outside, above the singing, we could hear the music of the procession going by. "Isn't that the procession?" Mike asked. "Nada," said someone. "It's nothing. Drink up. Lift the bottle." "Where did they find you?" I asked Mike. "Someone brought me here," Mike said. "They said you were here." "Where's Cone?" "He's passed out," Brett called. "They've put him away somewhere." "Where is he?" "I don't know." "How should we know?" Bill said. "I think he's dead." "He's not dead," Mike said. "I know he's not dead. He's just passed out on Anis del Mono." As he said Anis del Mono, one of the men at the table looked up, brought out a bottle from inside his smock, and handed it to me. "No," I said. "No, thanks." "Yes, yes, arriba. Up with a bottle." I took a drink. It tasted of licorice and warmed all the way. I could feel it warming in my stomach. "Where the hell is Cone?" "I don't know," Mike said. "I'll ask." "Where is the drunken comrade?" he asked in Spanish. "You want to see him?" "Yes," I said. "Not me," said Mike. "This gent." The Anis del Mono man wiped his mouth and stood up. "Come on." In a back room, Robert Cone was sleeping quietly on some wine casks. It was almost too dark to see his face. They had covered him with a coat, and another coat was folded under his head. Around his neck and on his chest was a big wreath of twisted garlics. "Let him sleep," the man whispered. "He's all right." 2 hours later, Cone appeared. He came into the front room, still with a wreath of garlics around his neck. The Spaniard shouted when he came in. Cone wiped his eyes and grinned. "I must have been sleeping," he said. "Oh, not at all," Brett said. You are only dead, Bill said. Aren't we going to go and have some supper? Cohen asked. Do you want to eat? Yes, why not? I'm hungry. Eat those garlics, Robert, Mike said. I say, do eat those garlics. Cohen stood there. His sleep had made him quite all right. Do let's go and eat, Brett said. I must get a bath. Come on, Bill said. Let's translate Brett to the hotel. We said goodbye to many people and shook hands with many people and went out. Outside it was dark. What time is it, do you suppose? Cohen asked. It's tomorrow, Mike said. You've been asleep 2 days. No, said Cohen. What time is it? It's 10 o'clock. What a lot we've drunk. You mean what a lot we've drunk? You went to sleep. Going down the dark streets to the hotel, we saw the skyrockets going up in the square. Down the side streets that led to the square, we saw the square solid with people, those in the center all dancing. It was a big meal at the hotel. It was the first meal of the prices being doubled for the fiesta, and there were several new courses. After the dinner, we were out in the town. I remember resolving that I would stay up all night to watch the bulls go through the streets at 6 o'clock in the morning, and being so sleepy that I went to bed around 4 o'clock. The others stayed up. My own room was locked, and I could not find the key, so I went upstairs and slept on one of the beds in Cohen's room. The fiesta was going on outside in the night, but I was too sleepy for it to keep me awake. When I woke, it was the sound of the rocket exploding that announced the release of the bulls from the corrals at the edge of town. They would race through the streets and out to the bull ring. I'd been sleeping heavily, and I woke feeling I was too late. I put on a coat of Cohen's and went out on the balcony. Down below, the narrow street was empty. All the balconies were crowded with people. Suddenly, a crowd came down the street. They were all running, packed close together. They passed along and up the street toward the bull ring, and behind them came more men running faster, and then some stragglers who were really running. Behind them was a little bare space, and then the bulls, galloping, tossing their heads up and down. It all went out of sight around the corner. One man fell, rolled to the gutter, and lay quiet. But the bulls went right on and did not notice him. They were all running together. After they went out of sight, a great roar came from the bull ring. It kept on, and then finally the pop of the rocket that meant the bulls had gotten through the people in the ring and into the corrals. I went back to the room and got into bed. I've been standing on the stone balcony in bare feet. I knew our crowd must have all been out at the bull ring. Back in bed, I went to sleep. Cohen woke me when he came in. He started to undress and went over and closed the window because the people on the balcony of the house just across the street were looking in. Did you see the show? I asked. Yes, we were all there. Anybody get hurt? One of the bulls got into the crowd in the ring and tossed 6 or 8 people. How did Brett like it? It was all so sudden there wasn't any time for it to bother anybody. I wish I'd been up. We didn't know where you were. We went to your room, but it was locked. Where did you stay up? We danced at some club. I got sleepy, I said. My gosh, I'm sleepy now, Cohen said. Doesn't this thing ever stop? Not for a week. Bill opened the door and put his head in. Where were you, Jake? I saw them go through from the balcony. How was it? Grand. Where are you going? To sleep. No one was up before noon. We ate at tables set out under the arcade. The town was full of people. We had to wait for a table. After lunch, we went over to the Iruña. It had filled up, and as the time for the bullfight came, it got fuller, and the tables were crowded closer. There was a close, crowded hum that came every day before the bullfight. The cafe did not make the same noise at any other time, no matter how crowded it was. This hum went on, and we were in it, and a part of it. I'd taken 6 seats for all the fights. 3 of them were barreras, the first row at the ringside, and 3 were sobre puertos, seats with wooden backs, halfway up the amphitheater. Mike thought Brett had best sit high up for her first time, and Cohen wanted to sit with them. Bill and I were going to sit in the barreras, and I gave the extra ticket to a waiter to sell. Bill said something to Cohen about what to do and how to look so he would not mind the horses. Bill had seen 1 season of bullfights. I'm not worried about how I'll stand it. I'm only afraid I may be bored, Cohen said. You think so? Don't look at the horses after the bull hits them, I said to Brett. Watch the charge and see the picador try and keep the bull off, but then don't look again until the horse is dead if it's been hit. I'm a little nervy about it, Brett said. I'm worried whether I'll be able to go through with it all right. You'll be all right. There's nothing but that horse part that will bother you, and they're only in for a few minutes with each bull. Just don't watch when it's bad. She'll be all right, Mike said. I'll look after her. I don't think you'll be bored, Bill said. I'm going over to the hotel to get the glasses and the wineskin, I said. See you back here. Don't get cockeyed. I'll come alone, Bill said. Brett smiled at us. We walked around through the arcade to avoid the heat of the square. That cone gets me, Bill said. He's got this Jewish superiority so strong that he thinks the only emotion he'll get out of the fight will be being bored. We'll watch him with the glasses, I said. Oh, to hell with him. He spends a lot of time there. I want him to stay there. In the hotel on the stairs we met Montoya. Come on, said Montoya. Do you want to meet Pedro Romero? Fine, said Bill. Let's go see him. We followed Montoya up a flight down the corridor. He's in room number 8, Montoya explained. He's getting dressed for the bullfight. Montoya knocked on the door and opened it. It was a gloomy room with a little light coming in from the window on the narrow street. There were 2 beds separated by a monastic partition. The electric light was on. The boy stood very straight and unsmiling in his bullfighting clothes. His jacket hung over the back of a chair. He was just finishing winding his sash. His black hair shone under the electric light. He wore a white linen shirt, and the sword handler finished his sash and stood up and stepped back. Pedro Romero nodded, seemed very far away and dignified when we shook hands. Montoya said something about what great aficionados we were, and that we wanted to wish him luck. Romero listened very seriously, and he turned to me. He was the best-looking boy I've ever seen. You go to the bullfight, he said in English. You know English, I said, feeling like an idiot. No, he answered and smiled. One of 3 men who had been sitting on the beds came up and asked us if we spoke French. Would you like me to interpret for you? Is there anything you would like to ask Pedro Romero? We thanked him. What was there that you would like to ask? The boy was 19 years old, alone except for his sword handler and the 3 hangers-on, and the bullfight was to commence in 20 minutes. We wished him mucha suerte, shook hands, and went out. He was standing, straight and handsome, and altogether by himself, alone in the room with the hangers-on as we shut the door. It's a fine boy, don't you think? Montoya asked. He's a good-looking kid, I said. He looks like a torero, Montoya said. He is the type. He's a fine boy. We'll see how he is in the ring, Montoya said. We found the big leather wine bottle leaning against the wall in my room, took it and the field glasses, locked the door, and went downstairs. It was a good bullfight. Bill and I were very excited about Pedro Romero. Montoya was sitting about 10 places away. After Romero had killed his first bull, Montoya caught my eye and nodded his head. This was a real one. There had not been a real one for a long time. Of the other 2 matadors, one was very fair and the other was passable, but there was no comparison with Romero, although neither of his bulls was much. Several times during the bullfight I looked up at Mike and Brett and Cone with the glasses. They seemed to be all right. Brett did not look upset. All 3 were leaning forward on the concrete railing in front of them. Let me take the glasses, Bill said. Does Cone look bored? I asked. That kike. Outside the ring, after the bullfight was over, you could not move in the crowd. We could not make our way through, but had to be moved with the whole thing, slowly as a glacier, back to town. We had that disturbed, emotional feeling that always comes after a bullfight, and the feeling of elation that comes after a good bullfight. The fiesta was going on. The drums pounded, and the pipe music was shrill, and everywhere the flow of the crowd was broken by patches of dancers. The dancers were in a crowd, so you did not see the intricate play of the feet. All you saw was the heads and shoulders going up and down, up and down. Finally we got out of the crowd and made for the cafe. The waiter saved chairs for the others, and we each ordered an absinthe and watched the crowd in the square and the dancers. "What do you suppose that dance is?" Bill asked. "It's a sort of jota. They're not all the same," Bill said. "They dance differently to all the different tunes. It's swell dancing." In front of us, on a clear part of the street, a company of boys were dancing. The steps were very intricate, and their faces were intent and concentrated. They all looked down while they danced. Their rope-soled shoes tapped and spatted on the pavement. The toes touched, the heels touched, the balls of the feet touched. Then the music broke wildly, and the step was finished, and they were all dancing on up the street. "Here come the gentry," Bill said. They were crossing the street. "Hello, men," I said. "Hello, gents," said Brett. "You saved us seats? How nice." "I say," Mike said, "that Romero what's-his-name is somebody. Am I wrong?" "Oh, isn't he lovely," Brett said. "And those green trousers." Brett never took her eyes off them. "I say, I must borrow your glasses tomorrow." "How did it go?" "Wonderfully. Simply perfect. I say, it is a spectacle." "How about the horses?" "I couldn't help looking at them." "She couldn't take their eyes off them," Mike said. "She's an extraordinary wench." "They do have some rather awful things happen to them," Brett said. "I couldn't look away, though." "Did you feel all right?" "I didn't feel badly at all." "Robert Cohn did," Mike put in. "You were quite green, Robert." "The first horse did bother me," Cohn said. "You weren't bored, were you?" asked Bill. Cohn laughed. "No, I wasn't bored. I wish you'd forgive me that." "It's all right," Bill said, "so long as you weren't bored." "He didn't look bored," Mike said. "I thought he was going to be sick." "I never felt that bad. It was just for a minute. I thought he was going to be sick. You weren't bored, were you, Robert?" "Let up on that, Mike. I said I was sorry I said it." "He was, you know. He was positively green." "Oh, shove it along, Michael." "You mustn't ever get bored at your first bullfight, Robert," Mike said. "It might make such a mess." "Oh, shove it along, Michael," Brett said. "He said Brett was a sadist," Mike said. "Brett's not a sadist. She's just a lovely, healthy wench." "Are you a sadist, Brett?" I asked. "Hope not." He said Brett was a sadist just because she has a good, healthy stomach. Won't be healthy long. Bill got Mike started on something else than Cohn. The waiter brought the absinthe glasses. "Did you really like it?" Bill asked Cohn. "No, I can't say I liked it. Think it's a wonderful show." "Gad, yes. What a spectacle," Brett said. "I wish they didn't have the horse part," Cohn said. "They're not important," Bill said. "After a while you never notice anything disgusting." "It is a bit strong just at the start," Brett said. "There's a dreadful moment for me just when the bull starts for the horse." "The bulls were fine," Cohn said. "They were very good," Mike said. "I want to sit down below next time." Brett drank from her glass of absinthe. "She wants to see the bullfighters close by," Mike said. "They are something," Brett said. "That Romero lad is just a child." "He's a damned good-looking boy," I said. "When we were up in his room, I never saw a better-looking kid." "How old do you suppose he is? 19 or 20? Just imagine it." The bullfight on the second day was much better than on the first. Brett sat between Mike and me at the barrera, and Bill and Cohn went up above. Romero was the whole show. I do not think Brett saw any other bullfighter. No one else did either, except the hard-shelled technicians. It was all Romero. There were 2 other matadors, but they did not count. I sat beside Brett and explained to Brett what it was all about. I told her about watching the bull, not the horse, when the bulls charged the picadors, and got her to watching the picador place the point of his pick so that she saw what it was all about, so that it became more something that was going on with a definite end, and less of a spectacle with unexplained horrors. I had her watch how Romero took the bull away from a fallen horse with his cape, and how he held him with the cape and turned him smoothly and suavely, never wasting the bull. She saw how Romero avoided every brusque movement and saved his bulls for the last when he wanted them, not winded and decomposed, but smoothly worn down. She saw how close Romero always worked to the bull, and I pointed out to her the tricks that other bullfighters used to make it look as though they were working closely. She saw why she liked Romero's cape work, why she did not like the others. Romero never made any contortions. Always it was straight and pure and natural in line. The others twisted themselves like corkscrews, their elbows raised, and leaned against the flanks of the bull after his horns had passed, to give a faked look of danger. Afterward, all that was fake turned bad and gave an unpleasant feeling. Romero's bullfighting gave real emotion, because he kept the absolute purity of line in his movements, and always quietly and calmly let the horns pass him, close each time. He did not have to emphasize their closeness. Brett saw how something that was beautiful done close to the bull was ridiculous if it were done a little way off. I told her how since the death of Joselito all the bullfighters had been developing a technique that simulated this appearance of danger in order to give a fake emotional feel, while the bullfighter was really safe. Romero had the old thing, the holding of his purity of line through the maximum of exposure, while he dominated the bull by making him realize he was unattainable while he prepared him for the killing. I've never seen him do an awkward thing, Brett said. You won't until he gets frightened, I said. He'll never be frightened, Mike said. He knows too damn much. He knew everything when he started. The others can't ever learn what he was born with. God, what looks, Brett said. I believe, that she's fallen in love with this bullfighter chap, Mike said. I wouldn't be surprised. Be a good chap, Jake. Don't tell her anything more about him. Tell her how they beat their old mothers. Tell me what drunks they are. Oh, frightful, Mike said. Drunk all day and spend all their time beating their poor old mothers. He looks that way, Brett said. Doesn't he? I said. They had hitched the mules to the dead bull, and then the whips cracked. The men ran, and the mules, straining forward, their legs pushing, broke into a gallop, and the bull, one horn up, his head on its side, swept a swath smoothly across the sand and out the red gate. This next is the last one. Not really, Brett said. She leaned forward on the barrera. Romero waved his picadors to their places, then stood, his cape against his chest, looking across the ring to where the bull would come out. After it was over, we went out and were pressed tight in the crowd. These bullfights are hell on one, Brett said. I'm limp as a rag. Oh, you'll get a drink, Mike said. The next day, Pedro Romero did not fight. It was Miura bulls and a very bad bullfight. The next day there was no bullfight scheduled, but all day and all night the fiesta kept on. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. In the morning it was raining. A fog had come over the mountains from the sea. You could not see the tops of the mountains. The plateau was dull and gloomy, and the shapes of the trees and the houses were changed. I walked out beyond the town to look at the weather. The bad weather was coming over the mountains from the sea. The flags in the square hung wet from the white poles, and the banners were wet and hung damp against the front of the houses. And in between the steady drizzle, the rain came down and drove everyone under the arcades and made pools of water in the square, and the streets wet and dark and deserted. Yet the fiesta kept up without any pause. It was only driven under cover. The covered seats of the bull ring had been crowded with people, sitting out of the rain watching the concourse of Basque and Navarrese dancers and singers, and afterward the Val Carlos dancers in their costumes danced down the street in the rain, the drums sounding hollow and damp, and the chiefs of the bands riding ahead on their big heavy-footed horses, their costumes wet, the horses' coats wet in the rain. The crowd was in the cafes, and the dancers came in too and sat, their tight-wound white legs under the tables, shaking the water from their belled caps and spreading their red and purple jackets over the chairs to dry. It was raining hard outside. I left the crowd in the cafe and went over to the hotel to get shaved for dinner. I was shaving in my room when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," I called. Montoya walked in. "How are you?" he said. "Fine," I said. "No bulls today." "No," I said, "nothing but rain." Where are your friends? Over at the Iruña. Montoya smiled his embarrassed smile. Look, he said, do you know the American ambassador? Yes, I said. Everybody knows the American ambassador. He's here in town, now. Yes, I said. Everybody's seen them. I've seen them too, Montoya said. He didn't say anything. I went on shaving. Sit down, I said. Let me send for a drink. No, I have to go. I finished shaving and put my face down into the bowl and washed it with cold water. Montoya was standing there looking more embarrassed. Look, he said, I've just had a message from them at the Grand Hotel that they want Pedro Romero and Marcial Lalanda to come over for coffee tonight, after dinner. Well, I said, it can't hurt Marcial any. Marcial has been in San Sebastian all day. He drove over in a car this morning with Marquez. I don't think they'll be back tonight. Montoya stood embarrassed. He wanted me to say something. Don't give Romero the message, I said. You think so? Absolutely. Montoya was very pleased. I wanted to ask you because you are an American, he said. That's what I'd do. Look, said Montoya, people take a boy like that. They don't know what he's worth. They don't know what he means. Any foreigner can flatter him. They start this Grand Hotel business, and in 1 year they're through. Like Algabano, I said. Yes, like Algabano. They're a fine lot, I said. There is one American woman down here now that collects bullfighters. I know. They only want the young ones. Yes, I said. The old ones get fat. Or crazy, like Gallo. Well, I said, it's easy. All you have to do is not give him the message. He's such a fine boy, said Montoya. He ought to stay with his own people. You shouldn't mix in that stuff. Won't you have a drink? I asked. No, said Montoya. I have to go. He went out. I went downstairs and out the door and took a walk around through the arcades around the square. It was still raining. I looked in at the Iruña for the gang and they were not there, so I walked on around the square and back to the hotel. They were eating dinner in the downstairs dining room. They were well ahead of me and it was no use trying to catch them. Bill was buying shoe shines for Mike. Bootblacks opened the street door and each one Bill called over and started to work on Mike. This is the 11th time my boots have been polished, Mike said. I say, Bill is an ass. The bootblacks had evidently spread the report. Another came in. Limpia botas, he said to Bill. No, said Bill, for this senor. The bootblack knelt down beside the one at work and started on Mike's free shoe that shone already in the electric light. Bill's a yell of laughter, Mike said. I was drinking red wine, and so far behind them that I felt a little uncomfortable about all this shoe shining. I looked around the room. At the next table was Pedro Romero. He stood up when I nodded and asked me to come over and meet a friend. His table was beside ours, almost touching. I met the friend, a Madrid bullfight critic, a little man with a drawn face. I told Romero how much I liked his work, and he was very pleased. We talked Spanish, and the critic knew a little French. I reached to our table for my wine bottle, but the critic took my arm. Romero laughed. Drink here, he said in English. He was very bashful about his English, but he was really very pleased with it, and as we won a talkie, he brought out words he was not sure of and asked me about them. He was anxious to know the English for corrida de toros, the exact translation. Bullfight he was suspicious of. I explained that bullfight in Spanish was the lidia of a toro. The Spanish word corrida means in English the running of bulls. The French translation is course de toro. The critic put that in. There is no Spanish word for bullfight. Pedro Romero said he had learned a little English in Gibraltar. He was born in Ronda. That is not far above Gibraltar. He started bullfighting in Malaga in the bullfighting school there. He had only been at it 3 years. The bullfight critic joked him about the number of Malagueño expressions he used. He was 19 years old, he said. His older brother was with him as a banderillo, but he did not live in this hotel. He lived in a smaller hotel with the other people who worked for Romero. He asked me how many times I had seen him in the ring. I told him only 3. It was really only 2, but I did not want to explain after I'd made the mistake. Where did you see me the other time? In Madrid. Yes, I lied. I'd read the accounts of his 2 appearances in Madrid in the bullfight papers, so I was all right. The first or the second time? The first. I was very bad, he said. The second time I was better. You remember, he turned to the critic. He was not at all embarrassed. He talked of his work as something altogether apart from himself. There is nothing conceited or braggartly about him. I like it very much that you like my work, he said, but you haven't seen it yet. Tomorrow, if I get a good bull, I will try and show it to you. When he said this, he smiled, anxious that neither the bullfight critic nor I would think he was boasting. I'm anxious to see it, the critic said. I would like to be convinced. He doesn't like my work much. Romero turned to me. He was serious. The critic explained that he liked it very much, but that so far it had been incomplete. Wait till tomorrow, if a good one comes out. Have you seen the bulls for tomorrow? The critic asked me. Yes, I saw them unloaded. Pedro Romero leaned forward. What did you think of them? Very nice, I said. About 26 arrobas, very short horns. Haven't you seen them? Oh, yes, said Romero. They won't weigh 26 arrobas, said the critic. No, said Romero. They've got bananas for horns, the critic said. You call them bananas, asked Romero. He turned to me and smiled. You wouldn't call them bananas. No, I said, they're horns all right. They're very short, said Pedro Romero. Very, very short. Still, they aren't bananas. I say, Jake, Brett called from the next table. You have deserted us. Just temporarily, I said. We're talking bulls. You are superior. Tell him the bulls have no balls, Mike shouted. He was drunk. Romero looked at me inquiringly. Drunk, I said. Borracho. Muy borracho. You might introduce your friends, Brett said. She had not stopped looking at Pedro Romero. I asked them if they would like to have coffee with us. They both stood up. Romero's face was very brown. He had very nice manners. I introduced them all around, and they started to sit down, but there was not enough room, so we all moved over to the big table by the wall to have coffee. Mike ordered a bottle of fundador and glasses for everybody. There was a lot of drunken talking. Tell him I think writing is lousy, Bill said. Go on, tell him. Tell him I'm ashamed of being a writer. Pedro Romero was sitting beside Brett and listening to her. Go on, tell him, Bill said. Romero looked up smiling. This gentleman, I said, is a writer. Romero was impressed. This other one too, I said, pointing at Cohn. He looks like Villota, Romero said, looking at Bill. Raphael, doesn't he look like Villota? I can't see it, the critic said. Really, Romero said in Spanish. He looks a lot like Villota. What does the drunken one do? Nothing. Is that why he drinks? No, he's waiting to marry this lady. Tell him bulls have no balls, Mike shouted, very drunk from the other end of the table. What does he say? He's drunk. Jake, Mike called, tell him bulls have no balls. You understand, I said. Yes. I was sure he didn't, so it was all right. Tell him Brett wants to see him put on those green pants. Pipe down, Mike. Tell him Brett is dying to know how he can get into those pants. Pipe down. During this, Romero was fingering his glass and talking with Brett. Brett was talking French, and he was talking Spanish and a little English and laughing. Bill was filling the glasses. Tell him Brett wants to come into... Oh, pipe down, Mike, for Christ's sake. Romero looked up smiling. Pipe down, I know that, he said. Just then Montoya came into the room. He started to smile at me. Then he saw Pedro Romero with a big glass of cognac in his hand, sitting laughing between me and a woman with bare shoulders, at a table full of drunks. He did not even nod. Montoya went out of the room. Mike was on his feet, proposing a toast. "Let's all drink to," he began. "Pedro Romero," I said. Everybody stood up. Romero took it very seriously. We touched glasses and drank it down. I rushing it a little, because Mike was trying to make it clear that that was not at all what he was going to drink to. But it went off all right, and Pedro Romero shook hands with everyone, and he and the critic went out together. "My God, he's a lovely boy," Brett said, "and how I would love to see him get into those clothes. He must use a shoehorn." "I started to tell him," Mike began, and Jake kept interrupting me. "Why do you interrupt me? Do you think you talk Spanish better than I do?" "Oh, shut up, Mike. Nobody interrupted you." "No, I'd like to get this settled." He turned away from me. "Do you think you amount to something, Cone? Do you think you belong here among us? People who are out to have a good time? For God's sake, don't be so noisy, Cone." "Well, cut it out, Mike," Cone said. "Do you think Brett wants you here? Do you think you add to the party? Why don't you say something?" "I said all I had to say the other night, Mike. I'm not one of you literary chaps." Mike stood shakily and leaned against the table. "I'm not clever, but I do know when I'm not wanted. Why don't you see when you're not wanted, Cone? Go away. Go away, for God's sake. Take that sad Jewish face away. Don't you think I'm right?" He looked at us. "Sure," I said. "Let's all go over to the Iruña." "No, don't you think I'm right? I love that woman." "Oh, don't start that again. Do shove it along, Mike," Brett said. "Don't you think I'm right, Jake?" Cone sat at the table. His face had the sallow, yellow look it got when he was insulted, but somehow he seemed to be enjoying it, the childish, drunken heroics of it. It was his affair with a lady of title. "Jake," Mike said. He was almost crying. "You know I'm right. Listen, you." He turned to Cone. "Go away. Go away now." "But I won't go, Mike," said Cone. "Then I'll make you." Mike started toward him around the table. Cone stood up and took off his glasses. He stood waiting, his face sallow, his hands fairly low, proudly and firmly waiting for the assault, ready to do battle for his lady love. I grabbed Mike. "Come on to the cafe," I said. "You can't hit him here in the hotel." "Good," said Mike. "Good idea." We started off. I looked back as Mike stumbled up the stairs and saw Cone putting his glasses on again. Bill was sitting at the table pouring another glass of Fundador. Brett was sitting looking straight ahead at nothing. Out on the square it had stopped raining, and the moon was trying to get through the clouds. There was a wind blowing. The military band was playing, and the crowd was massed on the far side of the square where the fireworks specialist and his son were trying to send up fire balloons. A balloon would start up jerkily on a great bias, be torn by the wind or blown against the houses of the square. Some fell into the crowd. The magnesium flared and the fireworks exploded and chased about in the crowd. There was no one dancing in the square. The gravel was too wet. Brett came out with Bill and joined us. We stood in the crowd and watched Don Manuel Orquito, the fireworks king, standing on a little platform, carefully starting the balloons with sticks, standing above the heads of the crowd to launch the balloons off into the wind. The wind brought them all down, and Don Manuel Orquito's face was sweaty in the light of his complicated fireworks that fell into the crowd and charged and chased, sputtering and cracking, between the legs of the people. The people shouted as each new luminous paper bubble careened, caught fire, and fell. "They're razzing Don Manuel," Bill said. "How do you know he's Don Manuel?" Brett said. "His name's on the program. Don Manuel Orquito, the pirotecnico of esta ciudad." "Globos iluminados," Mike said. "A collection of globos iluminados." That's what the paper said. The wind blew the band music away. "I say, I wish one would go up," Brett said. "That Don Manuel chap is furious. He's probably worked for weeks fixing them to go off. Spelling out Hail to San Fermin," Bill said. "Globos iluminados," Mike said. "A bunch of bloody globos iluminados." "Come on," said Brett. "We can't stand here." "Her ladyship wants a drink," Mike said. "How you know things," Brett said. Inside, the cafe was crowded and very noisy. No one noticed us come in. We could not find a table. There was a great noise going on. "Come on, let's get out of here," Bill said. Outside, the paseo was going in under the arcade. There were some English and Americans from Biarritz in sport clothes scattered at the tables. Some of the women stared at the people going by with lorgnons. We had acquired at some time a friend of Bill's from Biarritz. She was staying with another girl at the Grand Hotel. The other girl had a headache and had gone to bed. "Here's the pub," Mike said. It was the Bar Milano, a small, tough bar, where you could get food and where they danced in the back room. We all sat down at a table and ordered a bottle of Fundador. The bar was not full. There was nothing going on. "This is a hell of a place," Bill said. "It's too early." "Let's take the bottle and come back later," Bill said. "I don't want to sit here on a night like this." "Let's go and look at the English," Mike said. "I love to look at the English." "They're awful," Bill said. "Where did they all come from?" "They come from Biarritz," Mike said. "They come to see the last day of the quaint little Spanish fiesta." "I'll fiesta them," Bill said. "You're an extraordinarily beautiful girl." Mike turned to Bill's friend. "When did you come here?" "Come off it, Michael. I say she is a lovely girl. Where have I been? Where have I been looking all this while? You're a lovely thing. Have we met? Come along with me and Bill. We're going to fiesta the English." "I'll fiesta them," Bill said. "What the hell are they doing at this fiesta?" "Come on," Mike said. "Just us three. We're going to festa the bloody English." "I hope you're not English." "I'm Scotch. I hate the English. I'm going to festa them. Come on, Bill." Through the window we saw them, all three arm in arm, going toward the cafe. Rockets were going up in the square. "I'm going to sit here," Brett said. "I'll stay with you," Cone said. "Oh, don't," Brett said. "For God's sake, go off somewhere. Can't you see Jake and I want to talk?" "I didn't," Cone said. "I thought I'd sit here because I felt a little tight." "What a hell of a reason for sitting with anyone. If you're tight, go to bed. Go on to bed." "Was I rude enough to him?" Brett asked. Cone was gone. "My God, I'm so sick of him. He doesn't add much to the gaiety. He depresses me so. He's behaved very badly. Damned badly. He had a chance to behave so well. He's probably waiting just outside the door now. Yes, he would. You know, I do know how he feels. He can't believe it didn't mean anything. I know. Nobody else would behave as badly. I'm so sick of the whole thing. And Michael's been lovely, too. It's been damned hard on Mike. Yes, but he didn't need to be a swine." "Everybody behaves badly," I said. "Give them the proper chance." "You wouldn't behave badly." Brett looked at me. "I'd be as big an ass as Cone," I said. "Darling, don't let's talk a lot of rot." "All right. Talk about anything you like. Don't be difficult. You're the only person I've got, and I feel rather awful tonight. You've got Mike." "Yes, Mike. Hasn't he been pretty?" "Well," I said, "it's been damned hard on Mike, having Cone around and seeing him with you. Don't I know it, darling? Please don't make me feel any worse than I do." Brett was nervous, as I had never seen her before. She kept looking away from me and looking ahead at the wall. "Want to go for a walk?" "Yes, come on." I corked up the Fundador bottle and gave it to the bartender. "Let's have one more drink of that," Brett said. "My nerves are rotten." We each drank a glass of the smooth Amontillado brandy. "Come on," said Brett. As we came out the door, I saw Cone walk out from under the arcade. "He was there," Brett said. "He can't be away from you." "Poor devil. I'm not sorry for him. I hate him myself." "I hate him too," she shivered. "I hate his damned suffering." We walked arm in arm down the side street, away from the crowd and the lights of the square. The street was dark and wet, and we walked along it to the fortifications at the edge of town. We passed wine shops with light coming out their doors onto the black, wet street, and sudden bursts of music. "Want to go in?" "No." We walked across the wet grass and onto the stone wall of the fortifications. I spread a newspaper on the stone, and Brett sat down. Across the plain it was dark, and we could see the mountains. The wind was high up and took the clouds across the moon. Below us were the dark pits of the fortifications. Behind were the trees and the shadow of the cathedral and the town silhouetted against the moon. "Don't feel bad," I said. "I feel like hell," Brett said. Let's talk." We looked out at the plain. The long lines of trees were dark in the moonlight. There were the lights of a car on the road climbing the mountain. Up on the top of the mountain, we saw the lights of the fort. Below, to the left, was the river. It was high from the rain, and black and smooth. Trees were dark along the banks. We sat and looked out. Brett stared straight ahead. Suddenly she shivered. "It's cold. Want to walk back?" "Through the park." We climbed down. It was clouding over again. In the park it was dark under the trees. "Do you still love me, Jake?" "Yes," I said. "'Cause I'm a goner," Brett said. "How?" "I'm a goner. I'm mad about the Romero boy. I'm in love with him, I think." "I wouldn't be if I were you. I can't help it. I'm a goner. It's tearing me all up inside." "Don't do it. I can't help it. I've never been able to help anything. You ought to stop it." "How can I stop it? I can't stop things. Feel that?" Her hand was trembling. "I'm like that all through. You oughtn't to do it." "I can't help it. I'm a goner now anyway. Don't you see the difference?" "No. I've got to do something. I've got to do something I really want to do. I've lost my self-respect." "You don't have to do that." "Oh, darling, don't be difficult. What do you think it's meant to have that damn Jew about, and Mike the way he's acted?" "Sure. I can't just stay tight all the time." "No. Oh, darling, please stay by me. Please stay by me and see me through this." "Sure. I don't say it's right. It is right, though, for me. God knows I've never felt such a bitch." "What do you want me to do?" "Come on," Brett said. "Let's go and find him." Together we walked down the gravel path in the park in the dark, under the trees and then out from under the trees and past the gate into the street that led into town. Pedro Romero was in the cafe. He was at a table with other bullfighters and bullfight critics. They were smoking cigars. When we came in, they looked up. Romero smiled and bowed. We sat down at a table, halfway down the room. "Ask him to come over and have a drink." "Not yet. He'll come over." "I can't look at him." "He's nice to look at," I said. "I've always done just what I wanted." "I know. I do feel such a bitch." "Well," I said. "My God," said Brett, "the things a woman goes through." "Yes?" "Oh, I do feel such a bitch." I looked across at the table. Pedro Romero smiled. He said something to the other people at his table and stood up. He came over to our table. I stood up and we shook hands. "Won't you have a drink?" "You must have a drink with me," he said. He seated himself, asking Brett's permission without saying anything. He had very nice manners, but he kept on smoking his cigar. It went well with his face. "Do you like cigars?" I asked. "Oh, yes, I always smoke cigars." It was part of his system of authority. It made him seem older. I noticed his skin. It was clear and smooth and very brown. There was a triangular scar on his cheekbone. I saw he was watching Brett. He felt there was something between them. He must have felt it when Brett gave him her hand. He was being very careful. I think he was sure, but he did not want to make any mistake. "You fight tomorrow," I said. "Yes," he said. "Aliobeno was hurt today in Madrid. Did you hear?" "No," I said. "Badly?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Here," he showed his hand. Brett reached out and spread the fingers apart. "Oh," he said in English, "you tell fortunes." "Sometimes. Do you mind?" "No, I like it." He spread his hand flat on the table. "Tell me I live for always and be a millionaire." He was still very polite, but he was sure of himself. "Look," he said, "do you see any bulls in my hand?" He laughed. His hand was very fine, and the wrist was small. "There are thousands of bulls," Brett said. She was not at all nervous now. She looked lovely. Good, Romero laughed. At 1,000 duros apiece, he said to me in Spanish. Tell me some more. It's a good hand, Brett said. I think he'll live a long time. Say it to me, not to your friend. I said you'd live a long time. I know it, Romero said. I'm never going to die. I tapped with my fingertips on the table. Romero saw it. He shook his head. No, don't do that. The bulls are my best friends. I translated to Brett. You kill your friend, she asked. Always, he said in English and laughed, so they don't kill me. He looked at her across the table. You know English well. Yes, he said, pretty well sometimes, but I must not let anybody know. It would be very bad, a torero who speaks English. Why? Asked Brett. It would be bad. The people would not like it. Not yet. Why not? They would not like it. Bullfighters are not like that. What are bullfighters like? He laughed and tipped his hat down over his eyes and changed the angle of his cigar and the expression of his face. Like at the table, he said. I glanced over. He had mimicked exactly the expression of Nacional. He smiled, his face natural again. No, I must forget English. Don't forget it yet, Brett said. No, all right. He laughed again. I would like a hat like that, Brett said. Good, I'll get you one. Right, see that you do. I will. I'll get you one tonight. I stood up. Romero rose too. Sit down, I said. I must go and find our friends and bring them here. He looked at me. It was a final look to ask if it were understood. It was understood all right. Sit down, Brett said to him. You must teach me Spanish. He sat down and looked at her across the table. I went out. The hard-eyed people at the bullfighter table watched me go. It was not pleasant. When I came back and looked in the cafe 20 minutes later, Brett and Pedro Romero were gone. The coffee glasses and our 3 empty cognac glasses were on the table. A waiter came with a cloth and picked up the glasses and mopped off the table. End of chapter 16.